Okay, in this video, I'm going to be talking about the unity of the ideal and the material, as well as the unity of theory and praxis, alongside with the ideological truth versus objective truth versus dialectical truth, by using an example of Fallout 1 and 2 games. I want to start off with proposing my own kind of suggestion, which probably a lot of other people have come up with already. This is the view of the truth as ideological, objective, and dialectical. The dialectical truth, I would argue, is the actual truth. This is when you're able to see the struggle and unity of the opposites. You can see the core, the key contradiction. You see the way it may be resolved, and this is when you are able to understand a fuller truth, but it's always a degree of the truth. It's never a complete truth, because the truth is never complete, because everything is always changing. The objective truth, on the other hand, would be the type of truth that we are pushed towards in modern science. The modern science that is positivist or neo-positivist school of thought, where you are not actually provided with the objective truth. You are given a set of characteristics of the truth, and if anything changes, then they usually have a hard time dealing with that. And I haven't looked too much into positivism, but as far as I gather, it is more consent-based. It's more like, oh, we decide this is the version of the truth we're going to go with, and that is enough for us, because everything is relative. So instead of change, they use the word relativity, I believe. Okay, don't quote me on that, because I'm not exactly sure. But it is a very limiting view of the truth, and the objective reality is not actually an objective truth, because it only postulates that we can only empirically gather certain sets of data and then agree that we all observe the same phenomena, and then when it all changes, then we have to start from scratch and kind of observe everything once again and come to different conclusions, and there is no necessarily building up on the previous data. It kind of less coherent to me than the dialectical truth. And then the final truth, the ideological truth that I mentioned, is the kind of truth that socially and culturally exists, but it's not the actual truth. It is something that people may believe to be true. It is something very commonly shared among certain populations, and this is actually a part of mythos. So any kind of ideological truth can be understood, can be analyzed through a dialectical materialist lens, but it doesn't make it to be the actual truth. And I'm going to provide an example of Fallout 1 and 2 games, which I personally love. I think these are masterpieces. These are beautiful pieces of art. And I believe that they are speaking an ideological truth with a little bit of a caveat, where I believe they actually are the developers and the creators of the game. They were curious enough and open-minded enough to maybe possibly expand that ideological truth into something that they may not even have planned or expected. So I think that these games may be sharing a little bit more rather than just the American mythos, because on the surface, it is very much the ideological truth of the American mythos of the us versus them. Either it is us who win or them. We as a humanity are doomed to destroy ourselves because we're just so violent, we cannot be stopped. And then when we start from scratch, we don't fundamentally change. We actually continue engaging in constant violence and conflict, and it is the survival of the fittest type of a narrative, right? So on the surface, this is what Fallout games are all about. Of course, it is an oversimplification, okay? But I think that under this layer of American mythos, ideological truth, there is a layer of the questions that I allege the creators, the developers may have been asking. It is that, what if actually some groups of people may develop a little bit differently in the post-apocalyptic scenario? What if the people don't just go through the same old tropes as they did in the previous centuries? What if people actually try and do something a little bit different? And what if people try helping each other and cooperate instead of fighting and being violent? And I think there is this ambiguity within these two first games. I'm not going to speak on the third one because I don't accept the existence of the third one because it's so bad. But New Vegas I haven't played yet, but I'm planning on playing it pretty soon, even though this is not really my cup of tea. I do much prefer the strategy type battles where you don't have to engage in real time type of a battle. But I want to try it also to see whether it kind of corresponds to the first two. And of course, I'm inspired by H-Bomber guys' reviews. Fallout 3 is garbage and Fallout New Vegas is genius. These are some of my favorite videos of H-Bomber guy. I highly recommend you watch them, even though they're talking about some old games that may not be as relevant to many young people. But going back to Fallout 1 and 2 and how they may be actually asking some bigger questions, I think that it just goes to show that people who sincerely, genuinely engage with an art medium, they may accidentally stumble upon some pieces of the truth, even if they don't intend to. And again, this is a game, okay? It is not meant to be scrutinized. I'm not suggesting we should do ideological analysis of every single piece of art or media, but it is because I am engaging with these games so much more nowadays, and I'm finding a lot of comfort in them, and I'm finding them to be very helpful in my kind of a recovery journey where I'm trying to forget about everything that's happening in the world. Of course I can't, and because I'm continuously reminded of genocides in the game as well, I cannot help but wonder if there are those kernels of truth that the developers, the creators accidentally left behind in the Fallout games 1 and 2. And I do find mood-wise these games to be brilliant. I think that they're beautiful, they are communicating beauty and goodness or kindness, I would argue, even though they're violent, they're about killing people and creatures. But underneath all of that, there is the helping of not only your people, but also other possibly newer types of people like mutants and ghouls. And I love those little touches. I love that in Fallout 2 you can actually have a ghoul or a mutant companion. I think that this is, even though it's such a superficial bit of diversity and inclusivity, I do think that it matters, and it is making us perhaps question whether the American status quo, this narrative about us continuously being at war and this being normal, maybe it is questioned here a little bit, but this is just a suggestion. I don't insist on this. I do perceive Fallout games to be more entertainment type of media, not philosophical or very thoughtful type of media, but I do want to segue into praxis and theory being in unity, and ideal and material being in unity too. How do I connect these two things together? Fallout games, ideological truth, and all of that nonsense? Well, I'm gonna tell you. Because according to Ilyenkov, Evald Ilyenkov, who I already referenced here on my channel, the ideal is the moment of the material, and the ideal is definitely going to start affecting the material. The Marxist premise, the dialectical materialist premise is such that the ideal is dictated necessarily by the material. So the conditions in which we live and create our life are going to dictate a certain set of beliefs, a certain ideology, and the ideal, therefore, the way we think about the world, is going to be shaped by that. But then these two, because they're in unity and struggle, they're going to mutually exchange, and they're going to be a part of the same process. So the ideal is a part of the process of the material. When we, as a modus of substance, engage with the world outside of ourselves, by thinking about it, this is not immaterial. It is not only some kind of neural processes happening in our brain, some kind of stimuli happening. It is also us consciously engaging with the world with a purpose. And this is what makes the ideal a part of the material, because the ideal would not exist without the material. This is what the materialist monism postulates. And the ideal is never singular or individual. The ideal is always shared, it's always collective, it is always cultural, if you will. A good example of the ideal ideal is language. So we do not come up with our own languages. We use the languages that have been established over many thousand years, maybe 100 years for some newer languages. But we engage not only with the certain sounds that produce certain effects, we also engage with the concepts, and this is something that structuralist and post-structuralist schools of thought engaged in, but I'm not going to delve into that at all. But we do engage with language as a collective heritage, right? But we do synthesize new meaning by combining the words into sentences to communicate some kind of truths, which again are shared. None of our ideas and truths are perceived in a vacuum in our head only. It is all coming from the material world, from our experiences, from our praxis, from our activity, and then it becomes something unique because of the agent, the one who is actually making that proclamation, whatever it may be. So in this moment, when I produce the sounds, when I communicate certain ideas to you, this is when the ideal becomes material. Not only in the material vibrations of the air around my mouth and the sounds that others can perceive, but also in the fact that these words later on may have an effect, a tangible effect on somebody. And we oftentimes want to preoccupy ourselves with this notion that, oh, it has to be some grandiose impact. No, it doesn't have to be grandiose. It can be minuscule because changes occur somewhat slowly, depending on how you perceive the time. But the ideal necessarily is going to sooner or later influence the material. So when many people start talking and thinking about the same things, the same interests that they may share, this is when material, tangible changes are going to start happening too, because people are going to start changing their behavior, the way they relate to each other, the way they want to relate to the means of production, etc. So this is how the material and the ideal are in this tandem. It is actually one and the same process. It's not one or the other. One follows the other necessarily. They are just like this, okay? And same goes for theory and praxis. A lot of people think that you've got to learn the theory first and then engage in praxis. Other people say, no, your praxis should be guiding your theory. But they're saying the same thing because these two, again, just like the ideal and the material, they're the same process. One is impossible without the other. Because when you start engaging with the world outside of yourself, this is already praxis of some sorts. And of course, when people think that, oh, if I go take a sip of water, that's my praxis. No, this is not. This is just activity that you engage in. It depends, however, on what it is you're drinking water for, in what conditions you drink the water for, where did you get that water, etc. So possibly you drinking water may be praxis, but it's very highly unlikely. So, and even if you drink this little glass of water, you had to think about it. You had to have cultural notions of glasses. You had to have cultural notions of faucets, or the ability to use kitchen utensils, etc., access to water, etc. So all of this is theory. There is a vast amount of knowledge behind all of our everyday actions and activities. We don't have to know every single step of the process in order to be able to engage in some meaningful activity still. And the praxis and theory being in the same kind of relation as the ideal and the material is when you want a change in your community, in the society at large, in the world at large. You do not just start doing things, right? You start thinking about the best strategies, the best possible ways of changing something. You start making concrete plans. And this is theorizing. This is you engaging with theory, because if you just sit there and think on your own, you are most likely going to make a ton of mistakes. So you're going to start talking to other people, wanting their opinion, their input, and then maybe you will start engaging with people from the past, people who have written about engaging in all kinds of activities. And this is, again, you engaging in theory for the purposes of praxis. Of course, if you only read books and do nothing about your life, you don't change anything ever, then of course your theory and praxis are all of a sudden separated, and this is creating a conflict. It is creating a cognitive dissonance. It actually is very highly unlikely that it is even possible for you to not change your behavior and not change your ways at all if you engage with enough theory. The theory may influence the way you act and interact with the world in a very subtle way, just as I said before, little things, and because we're so used to grandiose narratives, we may not always notice that, but just remember that theory and praxis are just like this. So when you sit and read and talk about the possible solutions to the world's problems to other people, this is also praxis, because you are deciding upon what it is you're going to do. And if you just do without thinking, you're going to make a ton of mistakes. So, and very, very few people actually do things without thinking. This is a very impulsive, dangerous kind of behavior that is highly ill-advised. So I would argue that there are very, very few people who just act. So the necessity of both are just because, again, they're a part of the same process. You're not going to be able to separate them, and they're not linear. It's not one and then the other. And the westernized binary thinking, the formal logic, unfortunately, has spoiled many of our abilities to understand the complexities of the dialectical truth. So hopefully it all made sense to you. And if you're still watching, you may wonder, how does it all connect to the beginning of the video and the Fallout games? Well, let me tell you right now. So the people who have created these games, the developers of Fallout 1 and 2, they were also manifesting, so to speak, the ideal into the material. And the way they have been engaging with these mythos, with this American mythos, it created a change in the perception of people who play in the gaming community. It has certainly created a certain new standard, okay? Because these games have become a cult classic. They really pushed the narrative towards more curiosity, towards morality, towards politics, towards inserting all kinds of interesting characters with whom you can actually engage in a conversation as a player. And this is something that they did not do necessarily on purpose. This is something that through their material lives, they were able to get those ideas. So their ideal started happening, and through this theory, through this praxis, the one and only process, they created a piece of art that is now able to communicate things that are bigger than itself. And this is how every single thing is created in this world. Nothing is created in a vacuum. Everything is interconnected. And our purpose, if we want to understand the world better, is to notice those patterns, notice those tendencies, find those unities and oppositions that may be working in tandem, finding the core contradiction and thinking of how they can be solved. If we do it all collectively, first with little groups of people and then with ever-growing groups of people, then we're going to see a much better world, a much safer world, a world where everyone's going to be provided for, which is going to be a world where we build communism. So let me know what you think. Hopefully it all made sense to you. If not, let me know in the comments down below. I hope you have a great day today. Consider supporting me on Patreon. Do take care of yourself and your community first. Subscribe to me on all the social medias, even though I don't do much there. And I'll talk to you sometime later.